Welcome to the Fully Human Psychology podcast with Dr. Sophie and Dr. Chris, where we explore what it means to be and to become fully human. I'm Dr. Sophie. First, I should add that the opinions in this podcast are our own opinions and not those of any organization. This is a good time to remind you that you can follow us on Apple Podcast, YouTube, and Spotify, where you can leave comments and opinions.
I'm Dr. Chris, and in today's episode, we are very pleased to have Dr. Gina Subia Belton, Associate Professor at Saybrook University, and the coordinator of the Contemplative End-of-Life Care and Palliative Psychology departments. Dr. Belton is rooted in the rich tapestry of Chicanx and Mescalero Apache heritage. Dr. Belton brings a unique blend of tradition and innovation to the forefront of her work in academia and beyond. Raised by generations of elders and ancestors in California, Dr. Belton's identity is deeply intertwined and alive in Mezistaje consciousness, a guiding force in her ethnothanatological research and decolonial praxis. At Saybrook University, she serves as an associate professor in the mind-body medicine program. And as I said, she directs the contemplative end-of-life care specialization, which she designed and developed. Her faculty role extends across multiple disciplines, including transformative social change, another department at Saybrook, and psychology, where her teaching strives to co-create brave spaces that foster profound and courageous conversations. A published poet and author, Dr. Belton weaves together the lineages of indigenous, depth, and humanistic existential psychologies, embracing an eco-psychological perspective that her research describes as the way of cultivating an ethic of radical hospitality. This philosophy underpins both her academic research and forthcoming book. In her private therapy practice, she focuses on existential medicine within palliative psychology, offering spiritual midwifery at the end of life and guiding individuals and their families through the complexities of living, aging, dying, and grieving with balance and grace. Not confined to academia, Dr. Belton is deeply committed to serving Indigenous communities, particularly in areas of mental health, suicide prevention, postvention, and opioid awareness. As a sought-after community educator, facilitator, consultant, and dissertation committee member, she engages creativity and systems thinking to drive meaningful social change. Welcome, Dr. Belton, to the Fully Human Psychology podcast. And Dr. Sophie and I have known Dr. Belton for a while now, and we've certainly witnessed and experienced many of these wonderful things that we're describing. So thank you, Dr. Belton, for joining us.
Welcome.
Thank you.
Yeah.
So I would like to start this conversation with a question that you're very familiar with. It's a question that I heard you say in a different podcast that I found so profound. And the question is that, with your permission, where are you from?
Thank you for that. So
Yeah.
I'll begin my response to that by where and how that question originated, which was an indigenous way of encountering and meeting the moment. And I grew up next door to my paternal grandfather in the Sierra foothills. And I used to notice as I was growing up, sitting on the front porch when folks would come, and we would be meeting them there at the gate. He would begin with his hands together, and bow. Y con permiso, we say it in Spanish, with your permission. ¿A dónde son? Where are you from? And he's not asking, what street do you live on? He's asking, who are you? Who are your people? Where do you come from? how are you responsible to that, your community, your land spaces? And I did notice one of the things too, that who got in and who didn't, by the length of times they stood at the gate. Sometimes that interaction was 5 minutes. Sometimes it was a couple of hours. That's when folks were, the connection was present and deep and resonant. So where did I come from? I come from, as my grandfather said, not some of this or not some of that. You are all of us. So as Chris pointed out, the braid of my heritage, not only my racial ethnic heritage, indigenous lineages, but also my psychology lineages, those braids, all are informing of where I come from. And physically, it's from San Joaquin Valley of California. Our family has been Californian since before it was California. And I was just sharing with a client today, actually, about rivers and the spirit of river, and a student actually during an advising session today as well, how alive the rivers are. So in the area where I live, lots of rivers that I grew up on, so a great deal of natural spaces that I had the great joy to grow up in, As another connection to something that just occurred and where I live now. Usually on my Zoom, it says that I'm a humble guest in the unceded lands of the Wiyot, which is where I live now, in a place that's now called California. Arcata, California. And that's about 6 hours north of San Francisco. And it's where the Wiyot are. And one of the major rivers here is the Klamath. And the final dam was undammed. And for the first time in, I think, almost 150 years, try not to get emotional. Mm-hmm. It was kayaked from the mouth to the ocean freely by a group of indigenous youngsters. So they were all, they were not adults. Of course, they were accompanied by adults, but they were all young adults, adolescents, so part of it was just incredible. If you look it up, it's just the images. They move me for different reasons. I don't know, other folks might just say, well, it's pretty cute, colorful kids on a kayak in the river. But when you realize what was liberated, what was.
I was going to ask you if it was okay to share with us what it means to you that the last dam and waters were liberated. And I went, because that was so powerful to see you live this as it was coming through your emotions. So I wanted to see what that meant for you.
Thank you for that question, because given what I know a little bit about the origins of your podcast and these conversations you're having, it has, like everything in my work, the orientation of my work, it's relational. A primary concept in indigenous psychology and indigenous science and indigenous knowledge system is relationality, the recognition that there is no separation, right? We're all, that's why you hear that phrase of my relatives, my relative, and not just my human relatives, right? So when I first moved here and became a guest here, I met my husband here. We met clearing log jams for salmon in the rivers here.
Wow.
Yeah. We didn't work in the Klamath, we worked in the Eel, which was in a different part of the county. But there are folks that were doing work along the Klamath rivers as well. So part of the damming of this river had incredible implications, political implications, financial, economic, sustainability implications for the indigenous communities living here. And there's actually an event that I don't have near enough information about to talk about here, but something that also culminated in something called the Great Fish Wars. So it was a pretty significant event. If you get curious, you can look that up. So having been here a guest for about 41 years, having met my husband, we stayed and we continued to be good guests as best we could, and raised our family here, our daughter. And we tease her and say, well, you're the only Humboldt local, so because you were conceived and raised here. But so there's that implication, long-lived implication. So knowing, so the salmon couldn't run. You can't see that can't be a salmon run when the dams are the rivers are dammed up.
Yes.
Right. So that was one kind of like, wow, that work we did way back when in our 20s, you know, as kids. Look at this. You can be, you know, as my mentor Charlie Garfield would say, you know, the difference between 0 and 1 is you. You know, you made a choice to take a break from college and go do this work in the world. And so that was the difference. Another aspect was also something that kind of hits me deep in my bones is how the renewal and liberation of culture for the Native community here. It's a significant impact on this area. And as Chris pointed out, an aspect in my bio is around suicide prevention. When we think about, and we'll probably get into this a little bit later, but implications of colonization and how that happens in different ways when this, what might seem like a simple, we're putting up a dam so we can do this, the implications on how that impacts a local culture. So now they don't have a food source, they don't have an economic source, they don't have a cultural source, you know, to continue their generational conversations. And that has a significant impact on mental health and wellness. And so moving forward with that, jumping ahead to when I was a graduate student later on in my years, because I also spent years here in this community catching babies. I often will introduce to my students, I knew I was meant to be a midwife. I just didn't know it was meant to be at the end of life and not the beginning. So I started out literally catching babies as a labor and delivery nurse here in this community, this little small rural community. And right across the field, there is literally, like Rumi's poem, a field between the labor and delivery unit, the small rural hospital where I worked, and the United Indian Health Clinic. Just a field separated us. So tending to the whole community as they were birthing their children, I was present to that. So I spent about 20 years in nurse culture before differentiating into psychology, and my initiation into that spiritual midwifery to the dying began with the nurse culture and the women in that unit who nourished me. And so in that work, and this does tie to the rivers, believe it or not, and your initial question, you know, observing the health and wellness of those who were having children, and how that might not have been as optimum at all times. In that nurse culture, not only did I hold mothers whose babies didn't survive, I also, in that same hospital, worked in the recovery room and holding whole families when the surgeon came out to share that did everything I could, and your brother didn't survive the procedure. And then in the emergency room, when I was in emergency room nursing, because when you're in a small rural community and you run that edge runner space of the midwife, you're comfortable in liminal spaces and moving across sin fronteras, like I say in my bio, without borders. I was able to move across those areas. So in the emergency room, you know, as you would expect, there were many traumas you navigated that folks didn't survive. And I recall one with a son coming screaming up to the back door with his mother, aged, probably in her 70s, who was dying from a ruptured aortic aneurysm, and titrating morphine in this hand and saline in the other, with just the right of tenderness and intimacy so that she could stay alive, so the rest of her family could come and die with her family around her. So again, there was a day, it was summer, and I remember an ambulance pulling up with that same emergency room. We had gotten the call from the tribal ambulance department and said, we're coming with someone, and we knew they weren't going to be alive when we got here. I believe they had died by suicide, which was interesting in itself. But because this person had a particular space in the community, I think that's what motivated bringing them forward. There might have been just enough viability, probably, too, to bring them. What was interesting to me, and I know this was the seed of my research, was, you know how you hear the beep, beep, beep of the ambulance? So I heard those beeps as the ambulance was pulling into the bay and the whooshing of the doors open. And I just remember so vividly the sun coming through that doorway. And in that moment, I turned toward, and it was such a flash. It's like a dream that I remember, even in the moment, I remember experiencing it like it was a dream. I turned toward, and every one of my colleagues turned away. The physician, the respiratory therapist, the 3 other nurses. And I just remember that moment. That's odd. What's happening here? Well, you know, a few things were happening. It was a local tribal member that was, you know, the mystery was coming through the door. The dying time was coming through the door. And as many of my teachers in this work have reminded me, what you do is you turn toward the mystery and you meet it. Those who don't have the capacity don't. So those rivers and culture being blocked and oppressed and marginalized have a significant impact on the health and wellness and the despair. And often generational responses to that is dying by suicide. So not long after that encounter, I started graduate school, and I got to a point where I was collecting data in my local area. I decided to do a community project working locally. I was at the coroner's office, and I stood in the parking lot and asked myself, oh, this is very curious. I wonder what I'm going to find. Who's dying here in my community and from what? It never occurred to me that it would be, because we were kind of well known at that time as an area that served the aging really well, really well. And it became a model for the rest of the state and part of the country too, as I recall. And it never occurred to me that I would find that it was our native population and that they were dying by suicide. And that particular summer, which wasn't long after that experience, the rate was so high that the governor of California had called a state of emergency.
Wow.
Yeah. So all about that, the rivers. So the river, what was liberated in the undamming of that moment, culture, reciprocity and return to culture, possibilities and wise hope for healing of self within all of others and culture. That's the relationality piece. A river of sorrow.
It's very moving to me how so much was contained within that very split second, a fraction and fragment of a second that was moving through you earlier. So much was contained within that. So
it literally was. I mean, even in that moment, Sophie, I was so acutely aware of that, which was significant in itself. And I think, you know, as we began our conversation talking about Jungian approaches and depth psychological awareness, in that moment, I think I must have turning toward that mystery with consciousness and reverence and love, I was met with an incredible synchronicity. Yeah. Yeah.
And it sounds like you found yourself turning towards it, and you were also consciously aware of what you were doing as you were doing it.
Yes.
That's what it seems like. Wow.
Well, and because of that, I could move with that experience in a particular way that ultimately became named, as you pointed out in my research. The core concept that came from my research was cultivating an ethic of radical hospitality, and every single one of those signifiers, I wish I could say were of my own cognition and creation, but I want to honor that were all gifts from ancestors. And this work, they said, you will examine cultivating, you will examine ethic, you will examine relationality, you will examine deeply, truly, deeply, widely, hospitality. What does that look like? Especially with the mystery, yes? Yeah. And I remember asking even that because as you both recall, when you begin exploring your curiosity and your research, when you really begin to meet it intimately, there can start to feel some aspects are liberated in you, right? And they don't all feel good, as we know. And I recall coming into deep contact with generations of sorrow that I knew was not mine, that I knew I was hosting, but not hosting very well. I wasn't a very good host to those guests that were the generations of that sorrow, right? So as I navigated my own training and education through my depth psychological curriculum, I came in contact with other amazing folks who supported that, right? And of course, I did a year of capacity building with Frank Ostaseski and the Metta Institute in between my transitioning from nurse culture to psychology. And it was the impetus for me. I was like, well, all right, it's time to go back to grad school. Let's explore what this is all about.
This might be a good time to ask one of our questions we wanted to ask you was, can you share some about when you noticed yourself beginning on what we're calling it kind of a healing path, a healer's path? I don't know if that's the word you would resonate with, but as I'm hearing that there was a nursing period also, and I'm assuming even before then, something must have been coming up in you around that. But are you comfortable sharing? Yeah.
Yeah. I don't think I'm speaking falsely. I truly believe, I have always known I was going to be a midwife. I just didn't know what that expression was going to be like and what did that look like. So the only reason I fell into nursing, it literally felt like I tumbled into it, was because if you were going to become a midwife, you had to go to nursing school. And so the entire journey was, I even remember one day, and I loved these women. These were my mentors. They were, my initiators, especially the labor and delivery women, because they happened to be, we had a very strong and robust lay midwifery community here. So many of them actually were holding dual roles as licensed nurses and lay midwives. So they were, again, crossing borders, right? And so I remember one particular shift, and I'm looking around and said, I just don't have that light in my eye that you have. This little white dress and these little white tights and this little white hat are just too tight for me, And every time I share that, I just do this with my body. I was like, oh, it's just too tight. What is this? And of course, my mentor, Charlie Garfield, says, this is the nurse archetype and the archetype of the midwife are two completely different archetypes. And yours is very clearly the midwife, not the nurse. And he was absolutely right about that. But there were just enough elements in the nurse culture experience to support my initiation through preparing me for the actual midwifery I would be doing, which has incredible expressions now. And yes, to answer your question, I've always known that, and even as a child, and it might have something to do culturally, with how I was raised, that you were so we teach a lot through stories. So you're going to hear a lot of stories, as you already have so far, especially stories about my grandfather, who was an amazing teacher for me in so many ways. And I shared this story with Dr. Rich Bargdale, who's a professor at University of Virginia Commonwealth, and you may know him from the Division 32, Society of Humanistic Psychology. And I had shared a story with my grandfather when I was a little girl, probably about 6 or 7. So there were 2 stories there with him. One, we were in his garden, and I remember being like about 5 or 6, and I said, "Oh, look at the flowers at your feet." And I remember, "Oh, flower feet," just having this child kind of fascination with that. And I noticed my grandfather talking to his garden, speaking. He was having a conversation with his garden, quite lovely. And he was speaking a different language other than English, and it also wasn't Spanish. So I said to him, "Oh, Grandpa, teach me those pretty words." And I literally remember seeing a shadow come over, like a shadow flew over us and came over him. And he said, "I can't teach you these words. They're too dangerous for me." I don't understand. I'm just a little girl. How can I be dangerous? Those were the seeds of the first poem that I published with University Publishers Press, such a platform. And that was about reclaiming my decolonized mind. Forget the title, it's been a little while now. And then in another moment, somewhere around the vicinity of that time, my grandfather was also, we were working with the plants, and he was trying to teach me something, and I wanted to go play. And so I was being a little rough with the plant, be done with this. And he just took my hands and he said, "Stop." He didn't even say a word, just took my hands and said, "Stop." And then he moved my arm in a way that wasn't comfortable. He didn't hurt me, and he wasn't, harming me, but he just was showing me, "Oh, you're going to be rough with the plant." And in that moment, I received a somatic knowledge and awareness. And in that moment, I just felt so sad that I had harmed this plant. And in that moment was probably a conscious opportunity of wanting to heal in that moment. Let me tend to you now. I'm so sorry. I didn't mean to harm you. So I worked with him to, let's fix this little weed plant now. So that's one. So yeah, I think I just always known that idea. And they've often, those moments in growing up were experienced in ways that were not like playing doctor, or nurse, or those kinds of things. They were dancing, singing, poetry, what we would call poetry also. These kinds of things. Like, these are all healing gifts for that relationship. And in fact, one of the profound teachers that I've had in my life, of the many, especially from the Metta Institute, was Dr. Angeles Arian, who's an indigenous scholar. She's since died. She's an ancestor now. And I do introduce her and her work to many of my students who want to work with me as their dissertation research supervisor, right? So, and she asks these questions often, and this might be something you think about as well, too, when we get to somehow those times in our lives when we don't feel uplifted, or I don't know, but just not connected into our joy and presence and being in the world. And what she shared is that the ancestors would ask you, if you came to them with the complaint of just weariness or not feeling good, and that is how they would receive it. You're complaining about being alive in the world, and they would ask you, "When did you stop singing? When did you stop dancing? When did you stop experiencing the joy of the sweet territory of silence?" And there's a fourth one, and I always forget which one that is. So subconsciously, I must not enter into that one, because those three really mean a lot to me. So the recognizing the healer in that, and that takes us along the river here to back to my research, where one of the co-researchers, and I should share this too, that I have pretty deep and wide interest as a qualitative researcher, and a favorite and preferred. I love phenomenology, narrative inquiry, and of course taking various approaches, heuristics. Precious Sophie around that, around those. Because there's opportunity to bear witness to story and those experiences. And so I don't practice research on. So I don't practice a colonizing way of researching that is extractive and take something from others and then reshape it, inform it for my benefit, and uplift it as my own. I practice research conceived as ceremony with others, whether it's with other humans or phenomena, whatever that is. But I'm very aware that I am not I don't lead that. It's very important that it's an accompaniment as far as accompanying kind of curiosity and exposure together. But it was interesting that so going back to the co-researchers, that one of the WIO elders who participated shared with me around the kinds of medicines that are here. She said the medicine people, and some are singers and some are dancers, and some are, so it's medicine. And some are doctors, and not in the way that we know doctors in the Western world. Judges, and not in the way that we know judges in the world. They're different. And not everyone holds all of those medicines. You might hold one, you might hold two. Someone did hold all of those. They're probably pretty powerful. The ones that seem most powerful to me, I observed, well, that's really interesting. They're all women. So it's lovely to see too, because there's such a commitment to responsibility to nourishing the community. For one thing, that's just what was imparted to me, the wisdom from my grandfather and my elders. So what is your commitment to nourishing your community? One of the things, as I, again, in our river is a confluence right now, isn't it? But along with that, as a thanatologist and locally in my palliative psychology practice, my local community knows that they can contact me anytime to facilitate whatever kind of inquiry they're interested in, because they just know me to be that kind of a curious person, but also someone of reliability, as well as far as a container goes, that I can hold it. So one of my favorite ways to do that is to host a Death Cafe. So I actually started a Death Cafe Humboldt here. It's been going since 2017, I think. And so, of course, once we went into isolation, we didn't get together anymore. So locally, one of the senior resource centers reached out to me and wanted to start again. So we've formed a partnership, and so we've been hosting those. Remember that word, hosting, okay? Hosting them quarterly. And so we just had another one yesterday. And so a lot of what is fresh and palpable from that conversation is I can feel it already informing this one, as far as what folks were curious about and what they wanted to nourish. And that was something that they talked about. What about love? And I don't mean a Hallmark card like I mentioned with the group yesterday, because one of the constants from Jack Cornfield, who as we know, is a Saybrook alumni. I don't know if we know that, but he's a core founding teacher at Spirit Rock. And I love these things, this concept, constant. He says, at the end of our life, there are really only two questions. Did we love well? And are we loved? And we talked about this yesterday. And, I gave myself as an example, in the way of hospitality. To me, this Death Cafe, every time I show up for this, it's my opportunity to love well. I can love this community well. I can love us together well. We can practice. I can extend the invitation to love each other well. And again, it's not a Hallmark kind of love. We're not talking about that. We're talking about showing up fully for each other, turning toward the mystic instead of turning, being present to each other's tender hearts and curiosities and fears and anxieties, all the things that get activated with that kind of content. Right? So,
I want to highlight one thing, if that's okay.
It's okay. Yeah, jump in anytime because my river's moving today.
One thing that phenomenologically for me, what feels very palpable, and that's why I didn't want to pause at any time that you were talking right now, because of what was palpable for me, is the aliveness of your full humanity being so very much on display, and for all of us, like the river, like you're describing, so fully moving. And I want to name that because it's very much how it feels for me listening and in hearing from you. And I deeply appreciate, and I hope that others listening to you can also tap into that felt experience of feeling into what you are saying to us. Because as much as we say intellectually and we understand mentally some of the concepts that you're talking about, like love and being present and learning kindness and all of these important human concepts, what is very important that I have learned over and over in my life is that until I have fully experienced that with someone else, where I have felt the depth of what that is actually experientially, I do not know what it means yet. And being mentored through dissertation by you in this way was very much one of the ways in my life where that has happened in so much depth. And so my hope is that through this conversation and hearing you talk, is that others get to have that direct lived experience of more than just hearing your words, but really feeling that mentorship. And there is deeply this need of a direct experience from each other in order to grasp what it means to be fully human in a way that's so much more profound that intellectually this is what it might mean. And so I really didn't want to ask you very much what it means to you to be fully human, because it was so evident that you were showing all of us what that is. I wanted to name that.
Sophie, you're both so precious. Thank you for that. It was a deeply meaningful experience to be in companionship with you in your research and with every student. It's not a commitment that is intellectual for me either. That's every time, as you know, when a student reaches out to me around that invitation and opportunity, as Sophie recalls, we have a conversation first. We meet, want to hear your story. So one of the questions you had asked previously was, how do we dance with what gets in the way and what seems to get in the way? I love that question because that's what I'm feeling into when I have those early conversations about, I wonder where we're going to go on this, where's this river going to take us in this, curiosity of yours that you have journey. So, and it's lovely that it came back to, I think what you asked about, Chris, when I responded with, what ancestors ask you about when did you stop dancing and when did you stop singing? Because one of the ways we can dance with what gets in the way is to literally dance. You can do that. That's kind of fun. My niece sent me this fun little reel, you know, a little video kind of thing that's right now popular about doing a shimmy. A daily shimmy takes. I went, I love that. I said, I'm going to remember everybody do a shimmy. That's a great way to get up and get going. And before I get to my response about the question, because it also reminds me my first year of field works with the 13 indigenous grandmothers when I was in graduate school. And I still remember I learned so much with these elders. It was for me an experience again of the river being liberated, you know, my coming home and moving, you know, with that river to those that have held knowledge and wisdom and care. These women, I remember talking with their contact person, and they were being very clear. You're not going to have any contact with the grandmothers. We just need to let you know that. That's fine. You know, I'm just going to come and be because I had that nursing expertise, I offered to be a community nurse for them. Well, let me just give some Band-Aids to people or assess, triage, send people to the emergency room if they're having, because what their practice was to gather in every grandmother's community until they have gone to all 13 to hold ceremony and heal with folks, right? Offer what healing was necessary in that community. It was my good fortune that year I was beginning fieldwork. They were up in Lincoln City, Oregon, which is not very far, in Grandmother Agnes Pilgrim's place. I met Grandmother Agnes Pilgrim for the first time literally dancing in a field. I didn't know who she was. I just saw this shadow come by me and I turned again. There I am with that curiosity turning toward. And there was just this mountain of a beautiful woman. And she just put her hand right on my heart. And she said, pay attention, and dance with quite profound gravitas, you know? And I said, oh, okay. And who would guess that 5 years or so later, I would meet her again in this experience and talk about synchronicity again. So all around my office, we're surrounded by the grandmothers. So folks who come to share their love stories through their grief, the river of sorrows. And, you know, this is a tanka from the grandmother from Nepal. That's a medicine bag and a beaded stethoscope from Grandmother Agnes Pilgrim's time when we were there. There's a huipilo that you can't see from the Mayan grandmother on this wall. And underneath is a shawl with the mushrooms embroidered, Los Niños, from Grandmother Julieta from Mexico. And a tiger scarf from the Tibetan grandmother. Now, the only reason I was pulled over that gate that was put there was because the grandmothers themselves pulled me over the gate. Because one by one, you have to remember too, we're still in the modern world. These were still older women. They were all, the youngest grandmother was 65 and the oldest was 80. They were grandmothers. So there were little issues that had emerged here and there. But I guess there was in the community had heard, oh, Gina is tending to the community, like those early stories I shared with you, Chris, about the plants and the this and that. And just show up and you pay attention and you care, as Charlie Garfield would say. And so I was doing exactly that. Well, that looks like a cephalitis. You better go to the emergency room. I can't do anything with that. Well, that's a sunburn. Here's some stuff. That looks like poison oak. Here's a steroid cream. And then all of a sudden I get a call from someone that says, Grandmother Spider Woman wants to see you. Oh, holy smokes. Okay. So then I come to be with her. Within 5 minutes of our encounter, I was in a puddle of tears. A river was running through me. And she was being very generous with her teaching around grief and healing grief and tending to grief, more important. And then once that was all done, she says, okay, now I've got this problem with my ear. What do you think we should do? And I went, oh, okay, well, all right, here we go. So here's this river moving us through this place about circling back to the grandmothers and teaching. So how do we dance to get with what's in the way? You know, that moment was that time, that spent with these women was the very profound embodied reminder, literally fullness of being human together in community, about engaging in practices of ceremony, storytelling, intergenerational dialogue. So significant. So significant. In our perspective is embracing an indigenous way of healing and tending to healing. Okay. And when you're in thanatological studies and efforts and working with folks who are in their end of life and all along this continuum of care, we're no longer in the land of curing, the landscapes of curing, aren't we? And we can be turned toward the mystery that can be navigated through healing. There's so much that can be healed before folks take their last breath, as you both know, right? So much that can be healed. So dancing with obstacles takes us to the primary aspect, like as I mentioned, of my core concepts of my research about hospitality. You know, can we dance with these obstacles, accompany them in a way so that we are acknowledging them, sitting with the discomfort, as you've often shared yourselves, transforming the pain through community support and ritual, not just this one-to-one in isolation of the consulting room. I love that Mary Watkins named this at one of her talks at one of the Division 32s, where she says, how about if we take psychology out of the consulting room and into public? And that spoke right to my public health heart, because that was one of the areas of nurse culture that I could be with, because I could take off that little white dress and meet my community right where they were. And in a rural community where I was training at the time and still lived and serving, that meant meeting people right where they are, up in the hills, you know, TB shots on the grocery store porch, HIV tests in the middle of the forest in a rehab center, driving for hours up north up along one of those rivers and in a canoe to go see the grandmother. I had a few students that did that. So, you know, when you have that kind of opportunity here, that's you don't look at these encounters as obstacles. It's like, invitation to dance, is it?
There is a craft I'm hearing, though. There's a craft of receiving and of mentorship on the receiving, being mentored into our own selves and our full existence, being able to witness what the river is hoping to communicate, what the elder is trying to offer, what we are trying to offer to each other. There seems to be also a craft to that, in order to then to give that and be in what we want to, how we want to participate with life doing. And I'm hearing that, which really is quite demanding in the present moment. So that seems so important, quite of a craft to do, and that really was beautiful.
I would agree with that, Sophie, especially recognizing, I appreciate the signifier demanding, capturing your curiosity, because that speaks to ethic, right? So ethic, what is the ethic that is requiring my full humanness to show up in this way, and how, and in what ways, and what will unfold for that, experience. So, and that mentoring, that guiding, that supporting is about capacity building. Locally, I'll participate, and beyond, not just locally. I've done lots of consulting. When folks will ask, could you come do this training for? I'm like, I'm sorry, I don't do trainings. I said, but I'm happy to work with you on capacity building. Let's work on capacity building, because already that speaks to the relationality. It speaks to honoring and recognizing your already intrinsic wisdom. I already come to you recognizing you have intrinsic wisdom and capacity. Let's just explore together where that capacity is, and then we can work together to cultivate that, right? So cultivating an ethic of radical. Now that one was a surprise to me because etymology is one of my favorite things when I get stuck as a writer. I might have shared that with some students too. I might have even shared it with you, Sophie. I was like, wow, I don't really know where I'm going with this. So if I notice there's a signifier, a word that sticks out, then I'll go, okay, let's do a little etymological investigation and see where this comes from. So I'll follow that thread and see where it takes me. And that was what unfolded with radical. And so, of course, what we understand etymologically about that word is it literally means go to the root, the root, the root. So the way of cultivating the ethic of radical, what is the root of this issue? What is the root of how we will respond? What is the root of our knowledge and awareness and capacity? And how will we, you know, that's that radical. And now it's kind of interesting that radical seems to be a qualifier in front of a lot of different things. But if that's what gets people's attention and brings them to that, then that's wonderful. But hospitality then became the one that really worked me. That was a pretty deep spiritual teaching in itself, because I do recognize when students, it's one of the joys of being a witness to and midwifery with students in their research is the knowledge that you are on a transformative journey, whether you acknowledge it or not. You will be transformed by this experience. Everyone can practice it as a cognitive exercise. Go ahead. And then I dare you to still say at the end of that cognitive exercise that nothing in you was changed. And so imagine if you turn toward the mystery and go, okay, with radical hospitality, what can I really explore here? What is going to show up for me? You know, what's going to emerge? And with someone who at the time was just myself, beginning to turn toward the mystery of untangling and reclaiming a decolonized mind in that Mezistaje consciousness that Gloria Anzaldúa, she claimed as the one who coined that term, indigenous scholar Gloria Anzaldúa. It was incredibly painful for me. So that was, you know, the personal etymology of that, of hospitality for me. So I often get students, faculty, colleagues who say, oh, I'm going to decolonize. And I went, oh, gently, like my grandfather, take your hand and say, no, that's not where we begin. Actually, until someone who has that inspiration, that has captured their attention, sits still, begins with recognizing where they are located in the relationality of colonized and colonizer, colonizing and decolonized, until one can recognize where they are in that space. I will say again and again, as Yang and Tuck's title, decolonization is not a metaphor. It is incredibly painful. It's not something that can be extrapolated to anti-racism, multiculturalism, liberation, this or that. It has a very specific origins and very intentional operations. So believe it or not, we're in a space and time where even decolonization is being colonized. That it's operation itself from an academic sense. Of course, now given the current political situation we're in, nobody can talk. I mean, none of us can talk about anything anymore, right? But I do just want to share what Michael Yellowbird, my dear brother, an amazing scholar. He's a Riccara and in North Dakota. And he writes in his book around, it's called For Indigenous Minds Only. His early research was around examining decolonization as an effort in neurodecolonization, right? So recognizing the neuroplasticity, the neuroplastic effects, impacts right, of that liberation of mind. And so you're literally right, laying down tracks. But the process, the operation for that was embracing, hosting, right, indigenous practices. So for the benefit of, as he points out, right, our minds are contaminated with self-hatred, the belief that we are inferior to our colonizers, and we believe in both the necessity and virtue of our own colonization. That's incredibly painful. So when you begin to, and you talk about showing up fully human to that, there was a moment at a Division 32 conference where we had someone stand up, and she's Bahamian, and I remember her saying, I am colonized. And, folks who weren't prepared to hear that yet didn't know how to host it. But I knew how to host it. I had the capacity to host it. And so I did. And I hear from her frequently. We're very good friends now, actually, Dr. Chati. And she's over in Texas, which is beautiful about that. But the going back to about the aspects of colonization and decolonization, I just want to make sure I get his pieces right. He said it requires each of us to consciously consider to what degree we have been affected by not only the physical aspects of colonization. See, it's not a cognitive exercise, this idea of colonization. It is whole-bodied. It is physical, spiritual, psychological, emotional experience. So again, going back to the river, to see that river liberated in that way, huge impacts, he says, so reflecting on understanding that the decolonizing actions must begin in the mind, and that creative, consistent, decolonized thinking shapes and empowers the brain, which in turn provides a major prime for positive change. So just like other areas of oppression and structural, marginalization, it's supportive when even colonizers, and Dr. Spaeth and I, who I believe you also had a conversation with, who frequently have passionate conversations around the recognition of how there's the temptation for those standing in the colonizing lineage to spiritually bypass. So that's not a very deep capacity, is it, for hosting that history? So before being able to embrace the idea of decolonization of anything, it's important to just begin with hosting where you are. In that space. And you're both hosting very well. Thank you very much.
What I was hearing when you describe for us as coming from a lineage of colonizers, and at least from my background as being born and raised in France, that's very much still happening in a lot of different land that we're doing that. And what I'm experiencing as I'm hearing, the reminder of being in this position, and is an invitation of being aware of the sacred, and to not objectify and use and consume, and to be in a sacred relationship with myself first, so that I can be so fully aware when I'm stepping into a using stance or consuming to produce something, and to then in turn objectify the other and the other's tradition, and myself also included. And but I'm hearing the invitation of to go inward to the sacred within yourself, and then there's the capacity for a communion within someone else's tradition, and that would be more in alignment with what is, and it's very much what I'm hearing, experiencing. And
I really appreciate that witnessing Sophie, because you take me to one of my favorite indigenous scholars. She's of Ocean Peoples, from University of Hawaii, which is Dr. Manululi Alulimeyer. And she studied at Harvard. And many indigenous scholars will go away, but they go away to come back home and to heal. And she maintained that commitment, has been doing incredible work in her homeland. And part of that was working on that telescope that they wanted to burrow down into, and they just, you're not doing it. You're not doing it. And she's a scholarly, and her partner at the time, I think her wife was an astronomer, was part of that science community. And she said, nope, it's, as you point out, the ethic aspects, right, of that stance. Are we holding that with appropriate relationality and recognizing that harm? But I just love that she developed that way of meaning and understanding through a framework that she calls triangulation of meaning, where and what she now refers to as a holotropic, no, not holotropic, hologram, like a hologram, holographic epistemology, right? So here it is again, the thirds. That's what I was getting to, was, so here again, we're weaving in the river, alongside the river, with the lineages of psychology here. And I'll never forget Angela's Arian describing the elegance of the transcendent function, what she called the elegant third. And when I think of Manululi Meyer's work and the triangulation of meaning, it doesn't other Western epistemology. She just says, thank you, brother. Thank you, relative. You've done a lot of hard work. You can rest now. And now pay attention. And as Vine Deloria said, now Indigenous will speak. And really pay attention, right? Yeah. And so then when we don't other, then the opportunity for that elegant third, that transcendent function can occur, right? And it's not a hybridization, like my grandfather said, where they take some of this and they take some of that. He was very clear. You are not some of this and you are not some of that. You are all of us. That's all of your ancestors. Again, learning hospitality very early in lots of different ways, how to host self, how to host others, how to host. Whereas I always successful? No. Was I always a gracious host? I wish I was. Most of the time, I think I do. And when we look back, and I know when I look back, often that's part of when coming through some difficult experience, I often spend a great deal of time in reflection and going, wow, what happened there? What's that all about, Gina? And then and it inevitably comes back was, oh, could you have been a little more graceful? But what does that even mean? And I remember having a very specific conversation about it, which is really funny. But that again, going back to it's not, because there are some folks that talk about this idea as a kind of a hybridization, and that's not what this Indigenous scholar nor I are talking about. We're talking about truly of an elegant third emerging, and that's a braid too. You're not leaving anything out. Nothing left out, like we say in Zen, right? No thing left out. So imagine hosting that.
Yeah. I'm thinking of how I keep coming back to, from some things you've shared, that something that comes up for me is, in order for me to sustain love, I kind of need to open to the mystery. That there's some connection there with and then I'm thinking about, I've done that before, where in terms of my own background, I'm part this, I'm part that, and then when I think of when I am all of us, there's an interesting kind of mysterious question of, and there's something more whole, there's something whole, and then there's a little more mystery now of what is, versus I can put it all in a box.
Right.
Yeah.
Like that. And imagine meeting yourself like a mystery in that way. Who's Chris
Yeah.
today? What's this all about?
Yeah. Yes.
Here. Who is here? Knock, knock. Who's here?
Yeah. We we want to, I know we want to be sure before we're out of to ask you a question. If you could whisper something to future generations of therapists, what do you think you would, what do you think you would whisper?
Before I answer that question, and I
Yeah.
love that question, by the way, I got to circle back around the bend of this river that I
Yes.
meant to clearly articulate about colonization and decolonization, because I think it's really important.
Yeah.
And this is from Yellowbird, where colonization, he says, refers to both the formal and informal methods, behavioral, ideological, institutional, political, and economical, that maintain the subjugation and or exploitation of indigenous peoples, lands, and resources.
Mm.
So that's pretty specific.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
So decolonization is the meaningful and active resistance to the forces of colonialism that perpetuate the subjugation and or exploitation of our minds, bodies, and lands. Decolonization is engaged for the ultimate purpose of overturning these colonial structures and realizing indigenous liberation. So to undam that river is a pretty radical turn to the mystery.
Yeah.
Okay. So it's why when folks, my colleagues, my precious beloveds, all
Yeah.
might be enraptured or captured by the idea of decolonization. We want folks to understand that it's as that little meme says from the Princess Bride. You keep using that word, but I don't think you know what it means.
Yeah.
So I want folks
Yeah.
to really understand what
Yeah.
that means, because you cannot. It's why I described my work as intrinsically eco-psychological. You can't take. We are, as Jung says, come out of the world already. That's already world as psyche. We already, it's not separate from. It's not something I pick up my tent and go camping to over there.
Yeah.
I guess I can, but it's not very mindful.
Yeah. Yeah.
Health supporting. So thank you for letting me.
Yeah. Well, I mean, another question we had, I mean, and it's so wonderful because organically you're kind of answering all our questions and much more and beyond and deeper but we had a question basically naming that we're both coming from, part of where we're coming from is white European, heritages, and naming that we are appreciative of sharing this space with you and hearing the precious experience and stories but a question is there are there things you would like to see more of from white European therapists? And I think you're answering some of these things. One thing I'm hearing is not colonizing this decolonization movement um, through kind of either centering ourselves in it or um, trying to own it in some way.
Mm-hmm.
So that seems to be something you're asking for to really hear and listen and really listen to it yeah.
For
And that
sure.
it's a full experience. It's not an idea. It's not an
It's not an
idea.
idea. It's not just as
Yeah.
Yang and Tung say. It's not a metaphor. It's just not. It
Right.
just,
It's not a metaphor. Yeah. Yeah.
yeah. And it,
Yeah.
yeah. And that does eventually take our river to the point of what would you whisper to therapists.
Yeah.
I you heard me mention his name already, and my mentor is Dr. Charles Garfield. And he also is a fellow in humanistic psychology, an incredible clinical background. He's the founder of the Shanti Project in San Francisco. That was the outgrowth of the UCSF Cancer Center way back when. And of course, as that beautiful organization was emerging, the Cancer Center and the work he was doing there, he realized he was approached by folks who said, there's this new gay cancer and we don't know what to do. And he said, well, let me talk to our community, because he had developed a model that I think young therapists, emerging clinicians can think about, right? About being in community and community centered, and taking your psychology to the public, just private psychology, but also public. Because that is what we are meant to do. I remember Hillman saying, and of course, got some tributaries happening here, but we've had now over 150 years of psychology, and people are still well. Well, there are things we can be looking at from other points of view that might support that, right? So that is what Charlie did. He asked his community of volunteers with this particular model. You can't go into any volunteer institution anywhere, especially if it's a hospice, a palliative care unit, some sort of tertiary public health care space like the Breast Health Project here where I live, where you won't see, I even have it here on my desk, where you won't see this book. Because it is a model that they developed, where he said when he was the only clinical psychologist on that unit at UCSF, which was huge, okay, you've got to go tend to give some grand rounds lectures to these physicians, and the nurses need a support group, and you've got these clients and patients over here on this floor you have to visit, and and he said, I wish everyone a great idea in the shower. Unfortunately, he also said his came in those moments when you're in the bathroom crying in tears, overwhelmed with, this is just too much for me. I'm only one person. And he recognized that, yes, it's really important that you have developed your capacity that required particular thresholds that demonstrate in a certain way, right? So you have to take exams, show a piece of paper. He also recognized that we also have intrinsic capacities to tend to each other in a particular way that did not require that. And that's what he was interested in. And that's how this model came about. And that was born out of his work. He was literally a rocket scientist. He was a mathematician on Apollo 11. Wow. And after that mission had occurred, he was one of those guys with the little white shirts and a little skinny black tie and the pens in his pocket. And he looked around and he said, holy smokes, what did we all just do? So he was, so inspired by a collection of humans. Here we go again, right? Community, transcending something they had never thought they could do, but they did together. And so his imagination then moved to what else, how else can we harness this for pro-social benefit and healing and wellness. And so that's where those worlds converge. And he went back to school, went from mathematician to being a clinical psychologist, gone down the line. There he is dealing with all of this overwhelm. And he went, wait a minute, I did this already. We did it over there. And it was that similar kinds of, so he was a leader in a lot of the conversation at that time around peak performance. So he was one of the thought leaders who was contributing to that body of work. And so you can actually find 3 of his volumes on peak performer, which he says that is a world away from him now. It doesn't even, which it is. But it goes back to, again, that humble place of, can we all just sit in a circle together and show up and pay attention and care. So what I would say to your new professionals is what my mentor said to me. 2 or 200, you show up, you pay attention and care. People don't care. They don't know that you care until you demonstrate. And that doesn't mean that we're dysregulated and all teary and oh my gosh. We know that. We know what that means. We've had enough conversations around authenticity and authentic connection, and the beautiful research that you both are doing around presence, because that is where we land is presence and presence. So then it's not just having presence, but the quality of your presence is what Charlie's speaking to. Yeah.
Especially as how you embody and those showing up, pay attention, caring, those words, holding them poetically, and the etymology perhaps, and the embodiment of, not just rushing through that, but kind of, and I think it's useful as a therapist, and as a therapist starting out, is to hear some of these whispers from folks that have
Don't
been
be afraid of the mystery, as he said. Do your best. Do your best. That's all we can do, right? It's always to do our best to develop, to deepen our capacity, to be a companion, a good companion, a loving companion to the mystery. Not everyone, as you know, can move in that direction, and that's okay. Though I'll be surprised if not every therapist does not meet someone who is grieving.
Oh yeah.
So, and I in my own, building where I live, every now and then I'll get a knock from one of the other LPCCs or MFTs on the floor who come over and says, I've got this grieving client. I don't know how to fix it. I said, because there's nothing to fix.
Yeah.
So if you can put that down. So we could have had, 2 beautiful hours of conversations with theory and praxis and lots of $10 words, as my grandfather would say. And yet it's still going to come down to the essence of being human, fully human together.
Thank you so much for this travel of, I think we have been, we have been along around the river band, and I'm grateful for this dialogue and just being with you in this, with both of you, and conversation, and so I want to take that time. I know that have traveled, and I want to see if there's maybe some last parting words that you would like to share with us.
My heart is very tender right now because Joanna Macy, I don't know if you know Joanna Macy's work. She's an incredible eco-philosopher. Some would even say eco-dharma teacher. She is a teacher's teacher. She just died this week. She has turned fully to the mystery. And I guess what I'd like to part is to invite, because they've already have been here and are here with us as ancestors, all the ancestors into the room. As I often share in community spaces, that we are standing here right now, Sophie, Chris, and Gina, on the love of thousands. The love of thousands. Can you believe that? Because of that, all 3 of our lineages have ancestors who have made choices, hard choices, to love and keep loving and have wise hope, as Joanna Macy would say, to persist. Some would say endure. I'm not sure how I feel about that word because I'm more centered in joyful effort. So can we bring our joyful effort to something, to persist? We have to have wise hope so that we can have the next 7 generations. Thank you both for your beautiful work. I'm so inspired by it.
You're welcome. Thank you.
Yes, indeed.